Hello everyone and welcome to the Activist Lawyer podcast. My name is Sarah Henry and I'm your host to this podcast, which offers a platform for lawyers to share their story and their journey into law and activism. Our guests will discuss the challenges and highlights of their work as well as important cases, opinions on legal and political matters, and will offer up advice and tips for anyone interested in pursuing a career in human rights law, public interest law or criminal justice. The Activist Lawyer podcast is brought to you by the Granite Podcast Studio. Thank you so much for listening. Today I am joined by Lucy Barnes, who is a Pupil Barrister at East Anglian Chambers and co-founder and CEO of Lawyers Who Care, which is the UK's first organisation to facilitate mentoring, community and legal opportunities for care-experienced aspiring lawyers. Lucy is proudly care-experienced herself and an advocate for social mobility. Lucy's been a TEDx speaker, a major scholar of the Honourable Society of the Middle Temple. She's appeared in the Times and Counsel magazine, BBC4 Women's Hour, and most recently, she won Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Champion of the Year at the Women and Diversity in Law Awards. Lucy is also a trauma-informed lawyer and is passionate about making legal practices in England and Wales trauma-informed. You'll hear a lot about Lucy's work and, of course, the fantastic organisation Lawyers Who Care in this episode. And if you're like me, you'll find Lucy's passion absolutely infectious. And I really hope anybody listening today will take a lot from the conversation, because Lucy is very open about her own experience and her own journey into law. And if there's anybody who works in practices who are interested in getting involved in Lawyers Who Care, you'll hear a lot about the organisation and the fantastic achievements that it has made so far. So please listen in and enjoy today's episode. And remember to review and share. I am delighted to be joined by Lucy Barnes, joining me from Norwich. Welcome to the studio, Lucy.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Not at all. Okay, well, before we get into your work and a little bit more about your areas of expertise and, excitingly, one of the organisation that you're involved with as well, could you maybe share a little bit about your journey into law and what inspired you to pursue your career?
For sure. So I would definitely describe my journey into law as unconventional, to say the least. I grew up in multiple different council estates across Colchester and Essex. We kind of just hopped from different council estates when it was overcrowded, or at different periods you just had to move at various times. So I grew up there. I was one of 6 to a single parent household. And after a while, my family dynamics would be, as I described, dysfunctional. And unfortunately, there was neglect and abuse and various different aspects to my childhood. And then at 13, I was kicked out of my biological home and placed into foster care. So I went into the foster care system at 13. And then I thrived academically, which was really surprising, because before then, given all of the chaos of kind of managing parents' emotions, trying to look after younger siblings, poor attendance, things like that. I mean, your brain just can't focus on school when you've got so much going on. So school wasn't really my priority before then, until I went into care. And my foster family, they were really, really determined they saw something in me which was really beautiful. And they said to me, you're so much brighter than you think you are, which for me was a shock, because I didn't think I was very bright at all. So it took a while to kind of get some self-esteem, which they gave me, but they did. They worked on homework with me. They helped me go into top set, because I wasn't until I was in foster care, and they really advocated for me for teachers to put me in higher sets. And once I caught up on my education, which they helped me with, so that was the start of my sort of academic flourishing, so to speak. There was still a lot of trauma there, obviously going through through quite a traumatic childhood. There was a lot that I hadn't processed, but my main struggle at that time was relationships. So unfortunately, at 16, I pushed my foster family away, I would say, and unfortunately, I was kicked out of foster care. And at the time, although I had social workers, at 16, I fell off what's called the care cliff, which is when local authority support stops for you too, because when you're a child in care, the state becomes what's called your corporate parent, which I cannot stand that term. It's not particularly warm or friendly. However, these support for me stopped. I still don't really know how or why that happened. I unfortunately had to go back to my biological family, so maybe there was a misunderstanding there that I was reunified, whereas actually from my point of view, it was a desperation thing. I had nowhere else to go. So that was a really difficult time. So at 16, I had the sort of academic potential, but I didn't have necessarily the hope or the drive. But I did have one conversation with my foster dad just after being kicked out that really ignited that in me. And I'd had a really difficult time, what I would describe as a nervous breakdown actually at 16, where I just didn't feel like I had a family. I didn't feel like I had a home. Like all of these concepts people take for granted, such as mum, dad, family, home, they were all things I had to understand myself and to teach myself about, because they were so confusing and alien concepts. So I had a nervous breakdown, and that was when my foster dad sat me down, because obviously he was someone who really cared about me, and he didn't want to see me suffering in the way that I was. And he sat me down and he said, let's talk about your options, Lucy. You're a bright girl. You're going to go far. You know, you just need to get past this. And he really believed in me. And we had a lovely conversation with different options. And he said, well, what do you like doing? You know, you quite like drama. I loved acting. And then he said to me something along the lines of, you know, do you really like acting because you just, you know, you actually love it? Or is it because you get to be someone else, because you get to perform as someone else? And I kind of thought about that, and that was probably true. And then we spoke about, and out of nowhere, he sort of said, well, what about law? To which I spat my tea out quite comically. And thought, what? Because no one from the council estates that I came from went into law. Like it was almost like a preposterous suggestion. I was so confused, and I thought he was joking. But he did. He went into all of the options. He spoke to me. He must have done his research, bless him, because he started talking to me about what a solicitor and a barrister was. Because at 16, I did not know what a barrister was. I did not know what a solicitor was, which some people they find kind of crazy. And I joke about this a lot, but it's true. But the only sort of exposure I had to barristers was Mark Darcy from Bridget Jones's Diary. So that was it for me. And that was all I really knew of it. But he spoke to me and he said, you know, I really think you could do it. I really think you could be a solicitor. And just his passion in believing in me ignited something really powerful in me. And then it was kind of like a kind of movie pause moment. And then he just sort of like with a cheeky face was like, actually, and it's not to insult any solicitors, but he said, I think you can do one better. I think you could be a barrister. And it was just like, oh, okay, what is this world you're now igniting in me? And what's the difference? Why is a barrister better, you know? But I was curious about it. And I think what he meant by that is because I loved the acting component. I like being on stage. And he really, and I think he saw that in me, like it was one better for me, because I wasn't really going to fit in as much in an environment where I couldn't, you know, perform and do the public speaking bit. So, and that was really it for me. Once I had one person, just one adult, believe in me at 16 at that very vulnerable time, despite not getting any support from my local authority, barely any support from family members. That was enough to ignite the fire in me to continue in this profession. So that's really what inspired me. It was a very difficult time, but I always had this kind of notion, even if I was still struggling with overcoming complex trauma, various different things like that, that maybe I could make this different for people like me. And that I held on to that so tightly. And that was sort of my candle in the dark, so to speak. Like I always felt like this is really rough right now, but if I just keep pushing, and that's what I did. I had my part-time job to survive at Waitrose, which is a fantastic employer, and they care so much to John Lewis about care experienced people as well, which is just amazing that that's part of my story. And I funded my to save to go to university at the same time as doing my A levels, and I literally would study every single minute I possibly could, go to my job, work, and I was always like 3 a.m. I was sticking my little post-it notes on the walls to make sure I got what I needed to get, and that determination was just so powerful to getting me to the next step. And fortunately, I got one of the top 3 achievers in my year from nothing, doing my A levels. Brilliant. And thank you, and got my place to university. And from then, the rest is history. I did struggle during university and beyond, but I started making a note of all the barriers that I experienced, and I just sort of felt like maybe one day when I'm sorted myself, or I've got to a position in my career that I'll be able to support and help other people.
Oh, such a journey, and I'm glad you shared that with us. I mean, it's fascinating, you know, the fact that you held that belief so strongly, and it has shaped your work going forward, which we will talk about in a little bit. But just in terms of your practice then, so where are you working at the moment in terms of what areas you're looking at, and how did you decide to work in that area?
So I'm a Pupil Barrister at East Anglian Chambers. So we're a mixed common law set, which means we do a bit of everything, civil, family, but predominantly I'm in civil and family, which I enjoy because I quite like having quite a broad practice. But of course, given my sort of lived experience, there's a natural pull to family law, because there's this notion of understanding thing like trauma, and which I do a lot of trauma-informed training for practitioners, and understanding the care system from a lived experience perspective, which I find is really helpful in my work. So I was drawn to that in my sort of way of being able to help others and to help people. But I'm also interested in civil, particularly employment law, discrimination law. I'm also neurodivergent, so I'm quite interested in SEND. So there's quite a lot of different interests that I have at the moment as well.
Excellent. And just going back to your journey as well, and I mentioned there that, and I mean, even your practice, your day-to-day practice is shaped by your own experience, which I think is really important for the people that you're representing as well. You have that added element of the lived experience and first-hand knowledge. But lawyers who care, this is where I came across you, Lucy. And I'm fascinated by this organisation, and it just seems to be growing from strength to strength. And I see a lot of posts on LinkedIn, for example, and a huge amount of people who are involved now in different firms that are involved with the organisation. But you also won the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Champion of the Year. So congratulations.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. And that was based on your work. And when you accepted the award, you mentioned that it was a reflection of the work done by Lawyers Who Care, which is, of course, the organisation that you co-founded. And now I think you lead as CEO at the moment. So maybe tell us a little bit about, well, firstly, the award, which is fantastic, and also more about the mission and the purpose of Lawyers Who Care.
For sure. So firstly, I was so surprised to win that award. I mean, that was a real shock. I did not, even just getting nominated was just an honour. But as a care experience woman, and so many people still won't talk about being care experienced. And since our launch, actually, there's been a lot of barristers and solicitors come forward and say thank you because they're care experienced, but the stigmatisation of being in care is too much for them to share. So to have that representation of a care experienced woman achieving that award that was what was really huge for me, because otherwise I'm not someone who's like, all fancy accolades, must display them in every corner of the house. That's just not really me. But the sense of recognition for my community, you know, you do feel like there's some sort of soul bond with the people that have experienced similar things to you. So that's why that for me was just, I was just so positively overwhelmed at that event, because I was just like, this is so big for the community. It's a recognition of what we can do. I love the hashtag care leavers can, because a lot of the time there's a lot of people that limit the aspirations of what care experienced people can achieve. I know I've had that personally, but so many in the community report social workers or various different teachers, individuals, their own parents saying to them, you know, be realistic about careers like law, because you're not going to do it, which I'm completely against. And I'm more of a aim high and dream high kind of person. person, which brings me to Lawyers Who Care. And Lawyers Who Care was set up as a passion project, something I've been thinking about for a while. And then when I met Kate Aubrey-Johnson, who is a youth specialist practitioner of 20 years, she's now a recorder, her honour. And she published in 2023 a Dare to Care guide, which is the first guide to enable practitioners to understand care experience. And I just thought in that moment, I built a social media following through when I secured pupillage. I made a post and essentially came out as care experience. So I felt it was the right time to do so and show others that they can be whatever they want to be. So she followed me through that. And I thought, right, this is an opportunity here. Like we've obviously got a meeting of minds. So I reached out to her and just thought, maybe she'd be open to just having a Teams call and seeing, if we could have some ideas that we shared. So we had a Teams call. And the rest is history. We were both thinking of the same thing. We both had, from different walks, mine personal experience and passion, Kate professional experience of sort of the institutional discrimination and disadvantage of care experienced people in the criminal justice system and how they're treated. And it was a beautiful meeting of minds. And we just thought, right, let's do it. Let's create this organisation which is actually going to support care experienced people, so that this side of the law and they're deciding through their lived experience. And this is how we reach a more equitable and diverse profession. If people that are making decisions on us have care experience also. So we set it up. I left my job at the time to work on Lawyers Who Care voluntarily, because it was just such a calling for me. And I knew that I very fortunately had secured pupillage. So I didn't have that same job in security that I had. So I saved enough money to just think, right, no, I'm going to set this up and we're going to do it properly. So Kate had connected us with various individuals. I was able to connect through my social media following with a few organisations. We built a steering committee, which is central to our work, where we listen to care experience voices. So it's not just me as a care experience person speaking on behalf of the community, but actually we're led by that as part of our DNA as an organisation. We listen to our voices and the shared experience and the diversity and intersectionality within those voices as well, because that's really important to us. So it was kind of born from that idea, and I'm just still positively overwhelmed at how far it's grown. We just knew that there had to be an organisation like ours, because we had to flip the script, because it was no longer fair that people saw care leavers and care experienced people like in a limiting sense. And I knew what we could, and I knew that we shared characteristics that actually made us better lawyers. The resilience, the time management, the sheer compassion and empathy, which is a real strength through really knowing pain and overcoming that pain. There's a real lightness of touch that you have, personable skills, maturity, particularly if you were like a parent figure to younger siblings, which is it cuts across quite commonly in the care experience actually. So there's so much that we've got to bring, and that was just untapped talent. And we had a few organisations that were on board from the start, and it was amazing. But we also had some people that would say, well, not that many care leavers aspire for law. So we were really determined to prove them wrong. And now we have 132 signed up in just 1 year. And we actually sadly had to close off our form because we've got so many, which is a fantastic problem to have until we gain more capacity and funding. But we have 80 matched with their mentors across solicitors, barristers. So over a 2-year period, we decided that was really important because of the trust element. Often you've been let down by caregivers or by the state. So that element of trust is really important. And we also have our mandatory care aware and trauma informed training for mentors as well, which was designed by myself and with input from Kate and then Amanda Mears from Garden Court Chambers on the trauma informed aspect of it, and which really brings care experience voices to light and helps practitioners understand the specific barriers in a way that's very much like we're inviting you into our world rather than blaming anyone for having any form of privilege. It's just not the most positive way of actually inviting people through your eyes. So it was designed with that in mind, and we've had some really excellent feedback on it, and our mentoring program's just been amazing. It's just an honor. The whole thing is an honor, and I can't believe where it is now. It's just amazing.
Well done. I mean, it is amazing. And
Thank
the
you.
fact that you're providing a really safe space, you're also, I mean, it's obviously providing people with practical experience and advice as well. But I'm wondering, based on your experience and working with care experienced lawyers and the mentors that are involved, what more can the profession do, the legal profession itself, once they recognise, the qualities that people that you're working with bring and characteristics that you just set out so clearly there? What more can the profession as a whole do in terms of supporting your work and people who aspire to be lawyers?
Well, that's a fantastic question. So firstly, obviously, signing up to the mentorship program is fantastic. You'll be matched with your amazing care experience mentee over a 2-year period. So we do it through organisations, so law firms and chambers, rather than individuals. And that's because we really want to move towards systemic change, because a lot of the time there are so many barriers that people don't even think about, because it's just not in their lived experience at all. Even just like questions when you go networking of like, oh, what do your parents do? Or like, what ski resort holiday did you go on this year? And just
Yes.
so many questions like that people don't realise, and you can't blame them for not realising, because no one should ever be blamed for their lived experience. That's the thing. But it's just things that and we bring that to people's conscious attention. And so getting on board with the mentorship program, collaborating with us on paid work experience, because one of the biggest barriers to care experienced people is financial. We don't have a bank of mum and dad. There is no one we can call if we need 50 quid. And I've heard so many people say, oh, it's only £50 here. It's not only £50. That's your whole week's food when you're self-funding yourself. And that was definitely my experience. To have to do voluntary mini pupilages, which I did. I did 6 or 7, and I had to take time off paid work at university. So I worked 2 part-time jobs just to survive. And I had to take time off from those paid opportunities to do the voluntary work experience. So there needs to be a set standard, particularly for care leavers, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, that really understands that it's not just a week. There is so much that you're sacrificing, particularly if you have childcare responsibilities, whatever else. So we've worked on sort of a standard offer for care experienced people that we work with firms and chambers on as well. So that's another way of just opening those doors. There's a firm we're collaborating on in terms of the apprenticeship. So it's an apprenticeship we're working on for care experienced people. So those are ways to open doors for those who don't feel like they've got enough to go to university. So there's so many doors that are now being opened. We're hopefully going to work with the Inns on offering scholarships for care experienced people, and training qualifying sessions at the bar in both for practitioners and understanding care leavers as a kind of civil rights issue and a specific barrier, but also for care experienced people to help them understand things like legal etiquette and the unwritten codes of the profession, like things that you just would not know, but for having a family member or a cousin or whomever it is in the industry. So there's a lot that we're working on in relation to that as well, and that piece of work. But another big one is recruitment. This is something we're hoping to roll out our care aware and trauma informed training, which we've had fantastic feedback on, into recruitment panels, because it's so important that those who make decisions on recruitment understand that for a care experienced person, their trajectory into a legal career isn't linear, and they may have struggled academically because of the different, like I spoke to you at the start with just my own story to highlight the chaos and you cannot study and you cannot have access to the same opportunities as other people if your brain is constantly in fight or flight because of everything you've experienced. So we help them understand that and understand talent more broadly. I actually think it's way more impressive to meet someone who has juggled everything they've juggled and got, say, a 2-1 than an individual who got a first but had loads of tutoring, had everything given. There's just ways in which we need to reframe talent, and that comes down to recruitment and training on the different pathways, and how a lot of care experienced people have children younger as well. So that can be sort of a hurdle, and just moving towards more inclusive ways of saying these talents are amazing, but we're not going to expect firsts TEDx and all of these, because there's got to be a trade-off given how difficult it is to get into the career. So that's another big part of what we're doing.
Amazing. So important and fundamental work going on there, and we'll get back to it in a little bit. But I've just also noted that you are an accredited trauma-informed lawyer by the Scottish Law Society, and you've mentioned briefly some of the cases that you're involved in or that you work on and that you want to work on as well. And I can see your passion. I mean, it's very clear your passion and commitment to lawyers who care as well is certainly visible. But I'm just wondering, between your work and your commitment to the organisation, how do you manage to balance all of that? Is there a way that I'm going to ask, do you switch off at all?
Yeah, well, I have a 3-year-old to throw.
Oh, there you go. Throw them in as well.
But no, I have to switch off sometimes because I have to be, a present mum. Like, sure. I really have this appreciation of how important family is because I know what it's like intimately to not have one. So that is really important to me, and my sense of boundaries for a 28-year-old are a lot different to other 28-year-olds because I have to preserve my family life. I know more than anything that is sacred to have a family, and that I would never take that for granted. So I spend time with my little one and various other hobbies when as and where I can. It is difficult, particularly in pupillage. It's a particularly difficult time, but I think having those things is so important to mitigate vicarious trauma and making sure there's no secondary trauma that you pick up in the profession, and finding like little ways to focus on your well-being is super important. And I'm not always amazing at it, and I slip. That's why I have a husband who keeps me accountable. So because he can tell if I'm needing to do a bit of more exercise or whatever it is to find those moments where my well-being is enhanced. So I'm always grateful to my husband, and he's been an amazing part of my journey and enabling me to do all of these amazing things as well. So I'm very privileged to have him.
That's brilliant, and so important as well to kind of get that balance, because it's in your interest and in the people that you represent that you're able to show up and act for them in a full and kind of meaningful way. Just in terms of, I'm thinking back to when you spoke about when you're 16, I feel like that's when your activism kind of started in this area, not just in law or going into the profession, but generally in terms of supporting people who had lived experience like yourself. And just, I suppose it's a general question in terms of activism and the law, you kind of, I think, balancing both areas quite well. How important is it, and how has your experience been in the kind of interaction between activism and the law in making kind of societal change and meaningful change around us?
It's a really great question. I think it's so important. I'm a big fan of, as they talk about in writing, show not tell. I think that activism is so important, and the way that you live your life and your values comes back to integrity. And if you just embody your values, it won't come overnight, but then people will start to listen. And I think that in activism is really important, particularly in the law. I think it's so much more powerful to first become your own biggest advocate before you can start to be an activist or an advocate for others. And once you really understand yourself, I did a lot of, I guess what could be called as inner work by some, but I've read about 100 psychology and philosophy books. So I've really got to a point where I knew my principles, my what's fundamental to me, my values, before I could step into the legal domain. So I had to know who I was before I knew what I could represent, if that makes any sense, and moving towards that and adding that to the law in a way that's not, because I think sometimes in activism people, and I can understand completely why they do it, it makes complete sense. There's so many injustices in the world, there really are, but saying to people, you're so privileged, it's all your fault, that just puts people on the back foot. So it's really important in sort of my activism and advocacy to show people what it's like to grow up in care, rather than berating them for their experiences not growing up in care, because it's not their fault either. So, I think that's really important in kind of how I bring it to the attention of legal professionals, and through inspiration rather than demand, I would say.
Brilliant. And I'm sure there are plenty of people listening today who will be both encouraged and inspired by your journey and by the work that you're doing with your colleagues in Lawyers Who Care. But what advice might you have for anybody listening who feels like, they maybe have a similar experience? What might they do, and what might you say your advice and tips be to them in terms of starting off in a career in law?
That's a fantastic question again. It's all about the baby steps, I think. I think the baby steps accrue. I think a lot people might look at me now and think, how does she juggle it, as you say, like how does she do all of that? But how I am now and how I've got to my career is just an accumulation of so many tiny little baby steps towards a better life, making small differences, not changing anything overnight, and really setting the goal in mind, knowing that I don't know whether I'd achieve it in 5, 10, 20 years, but the goal was always there. The goal was to help others when I could, after the point I could help myself, because obviously I had to have enough stability to be able to do that, to build that platform, but taking really small steps toward that direction, seeking help when necessary. I'm a big fan of therapy and counselling. I think it's really important to look after yourself and to know who you are, and a big part of that is sort of therapeutic support. So taking those steps to do that, taking the steps to read a book about anything related to psychology that could help you, reading a book about boundaries. Recently, I read a really fantastic book about self-compassion, because I think ultimately we can be really, particularly in the legal profession, we're not the most self-compassionate. We'll finish a beautiful piece of legal drafting and hone in on the one typo, so it's really important to just make those micro steps, and then it almost seems like out of nowhere, those add up, and they then start, and opportunities then start to build and appear where you wouldn't have seen them. I mean, I've had to face a lot of rejection, but I kept strong in that and thinking, well, one day, as long as I keep working on myself, I'm also always asking for feedback, whether positive or not. Otherwise, I always want to be better. And even if you find it cringe or you find it uncomfortable, if there's someone you can ask for feedback for, be bold about it, because those are the people that are going to mean you can get to the next step. Particularly, the people like mentors, for example, who wish you well. And some of the best advice I've had is stuff that's challenged me rather than, anything else. So I think that's really important, and seeking people that can help you, and taking those baby steps.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that's really important about seeking that feedback. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's really great advice there. And I'm just wondering, Lucy, what's next for lawyers who care, and how can both individuals and firms or practices who are listening get involved?
No, again, a fantastic question. So we are seeking to expand our programme. We've currently got 80 matched. As I said, we're hoping to gain, we've got 130 signed up, and then we can open it up again for the third cohort. So if anyone's interested in joining the third cohort, please get in touch via our website. We will start recruiting as soon as we possibly can for that. And it's not even just being a part of the organisation. It's actually becoming a bit of a movement, which is just incredible. Like, it's the rights for those that have had nothing, and people are really getting on board with that, which is just really lovely to see. Championing care experience voices is another big one coming to our events. We do host monthly webinars. Got my W's confused there. Very common for a neurodivergent person. We host monthly webinars in various different topics. We bring on some really esteemed speakers, different aspects of the care experience, which is also included in the mentorship program. So we had one recently on the asylum seeking children growing up through the care system, and how their lens is really important in understanding that lived experience. And then supporting us, we've got an event coming up on the 17th of July at Garden Court Chambers, which I've led alongside Nicola Braganza Casey on how to argue discrimination against care leavers in court. So that's going to be a really big one. So coming to those events and just basically bringing care experienced people to the consciousness of the profession. We're working with the BSB. We hope to work with the with the SRA and Law Society as well, and trying to understand these things, because for us, care experience shouldn't just be a bolt on to social mobility. It is something that's so important to understand the specifics of what it is actually like, and going right behind and seeing through our eyes, and learning to see through our eyes. So there's a real power in effective championship. We've got some fantastic champions already. So Andrew McFarlane, president of the Family Division, he's one of our biggest champions, and just really showing the world and the profession what care experience talent can look like, which really reframes the narrative that we, and all the statistics, which I won't even, relay here because they're everywhere, and reframes reframing and making a more positive narrative for care experienced people, and working with us to consult with us on how recruitment processes can be better, and it not moving away from the where you were looked after child box on an application form, because actually for a lot of care experienced people, they don't want to tick that box because of the societal wide stigma and prejudice that we face. And I've still, to this day, despite all of my advocacy and activism, I still get comments which I'm pretty sure are based in pity, which I call the backhand of prejudice, when it's someone who's looking down on you a little bit, and you still feel that. So there's still a long way to go. There's still not as many care experienced people as we want, who we know as care experienced, you know, coming forward and being proud of it. Like, I see it as something not to be ashamed of. I see it as something to be proud of, and that's, you know, having advocates who really see that as well and are very proud. My chambers is a really fantastic example. They are so behind me in everything I do, and they support my work. They support lawyers who care. It wasn't even a decision, really. I asked them when we were starting up. They're one of our founding organisations, and within a week they were like, yeah, we're signed up. You know, it's just that unlimited belief in potential. I think that's what's really important, and standing in solidarity with care experienced people.
Well, I mean, as you say, perhaps there's a long way to go, but the movement, as you call it, which I love, is clearly flourishing with huge support around it, which is just fantastic to see. And so early on in your career, Lucy, what an achievement, what an accomplishment.
Thank you.
And I just look forward to seeing how this grows. It's fantastic. And I'm sure more people will be part of this once they hear you speak. And I know you've been speaking on many programmes about your experience, and you're, you know, confident and able to share that. And I think it's just so important for people listening today. And I'm sure they're really inspired and encouraged, as I said, by your journey and by the steps that you've taken to achieve what you have. So congratulations, first of all. And thank you so much for joining me on the Activist Lawyer podcast.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Sarah, for having me and having a care experienced person speak. That means a lot.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.